Welcome to Seahawks Draft Blog live stream. Rob Staten, Robbie Williams, Adam Nathan with you here as we are going to preview the start of the NFL season. It's finally here. You know, there's a long, big, boring bit in the summer where there's no football, and we are ready, just a few days away from the start of the season. Everything sounds quite positive. Listening to Pete Carroll and John Schneider over the last 24 hours in terms of injuries, some of the players who've been out towards the back end of training camp and the latter stages of pre-season, they all seem to be back to some extent or very close to coming back. So it all sounds pretty positive on the health front. I think the Seahawks have got guys, possibly one of the better games they could have first up, the Rams at home, in terms of trying to get a win in that first game, especially given the news this week that Cooper Kupp might end up going on injured reserve, and he's certainly going to miss this first game. The Rams, I want to talk a bit about them because I just don't really understand what the Rams are doing and where they are as a franchise. But you know, Robbie, how are you feeling about the game? The Rams first up for the Seahawks coming up this Sunday.
Yeah, I feel pretty good about it. I mean, like you said, Cooper Kupp's not playing. I think that's a huge benefit, obviously, for the Seahawks. And then, kind of Pete saying, a bunch of players are coming back. And I feel like this is set up nicely for us to start the season off at home against the Rams. Just not sure, like you said, where they're at or what the direction they're going. And, I guess that this is a good test for the O-line right away against Aaron Donald. But other than that, I think this matches up pretty well.
Adam, the Rams are in a weird place because on the one hand, you'd be completely justified as a Seahawks fan to remind yourself that the Seahawks do not have a good record against Sean McVay. Over the last few years, it has been a bit of a toil against his teams. Even last season, when the Seahawks were better and superior than the Rams, there were two fairly close games. So it's not where you can sort of look at the Rams and go, this is going to be a walkover. You can't assume that because of the way that the Seahawks have played McVay over the years. But at the same time, don't the Rams just look like a team that are caught between two visions? They've moved on from players, like traded Jalen Ramsey away for a ham sandwich, and they've kind of moved on from some other veteran players. Yet they've kept hold of key players like Aaron Donald and Cooper Kupp. They've got a very expensive aging quarterback in Matt Stafford. Matt Stafford's wife was on a podcast a few weeks ago complaining that her husband can't relate to any of the younger players and that they're on their phones in the locker room and stuff like that. So the Rams, to me, feel slightly shambolic, Adam, and therefore maybe a good opponent to have first up. I actually think they're a better opponent to have first up than even the Arizona Cardinals, who everybody thinks is going to earn the number one overall pick this year, because I think the Cardinals will get gradually worse as the season goes on. And in the first week, the Cardinals may well have a puncher's chance of actually winning a football game. I think after this week one, when people have got tape on them, I think they're going to be pretty dreadful for the whole of the year. So I actually think there might not be many better opponents to have for Seattle than the Rams at home in week one.
Yeah, I agree. The only thing you can cling to from the Rams side is that, in the way that we say with Pete Carroll, McVay clearly gets a tremendous amount of buy-in from his players. I mean, that team took a Seahawks team that were trying to win a game to hopefully get into the playoffs. And that, with Baker Mayfield trying to find Ben Skoranek and Tutu Atwell, I think it went to overtime in the end, didn't it? And it was just a slightly underthrown ball from Baker Mayfield picked up by Quandre Diggs that turned that game on its head at the end. And I think when we saw that ball leave Mayfield's hand, I think there was a collective wince from 5,000 miles away that you could hear, thinking, oh my goodness, are we going to lose this game? So I think fair play to Sean McVay. He clearly has the X factor that, we eulogize about loads of Seahawk coaches, that his players play hard for him. And there's obviously a reason why he's not retired or left the franchise like many thought. So, the Rams are one of those teams where, just seeing the uniform, albeit how dreadful it is, it kind of freaks you out when it comes into Seattle, because you're going to get every last drop of what they've got. And Aaron Donald against, Brown at center. You could, there are certain matchups that you could look at and say the Rams could exploit it. Not notwithstanding, the Seahawks look like they're in really good shape and should, I'm expecting a good performance this weekend. I think we need a good performance just to sort of set this ball rolling.
If anybody has a comment that they want putting up on the screen or a question or anything like that, just super chat away and we will come to those super chats immediately. Robbie, apart from the fact that I made a very very sound remark on the uniforms being dreadful for the Rams, and clearly they are. And look, they've gone back to sort of that throwback style, Robbie, but I don't know. I've never liked that color scheme that the Rams have, and they've gone back to it, and they've somehow made it even worse with this attempt at a modern design. But that aside, I suppose the one thing, and wherever Aaron Donald is playing in the NFC West, you've always got to be fearful that he can come in and destroy a game. And that's the thing, isn't it, Robbie? It's not Stafford. It's not whoever is going to be trying to catch passes from Matt Stafford, or even the running game, I'd suggest, despite all of Seattle's concerns and legit concerns about their run defense. It's whether Donald can just blow up an offensive line, as he has done so many times against the Seahawks. Seems to have his best. Aaron Donald seems to struggle against the Niners every time he plays the Niners, and just dominate every time he plays the Seahawks. That's going to be the key, isn't it, Robbie? He is the one person who could keep this a really close game and maybe even nick one for the Rams.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he's the one guy on defense anyways. I also kind of what Adam was saying. I mean, McVay is a smart coach. I think there's a way that he could potentially just try to, I hate to say run the clock, but I mean, honestly, if they could establish the run game going early with Cam Akers and keep our defense on the field, control the clock and move the ball down the field and make it really difficult for our offense. I could see a scenario where they absolutely come in and control the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball, and then we struggle to get something going. There's a scenario where that can happen, but I think the key is to Aaron Donald and how you block him, with your new center and the guards, and how you attack and try to limit his playmaking on you, because you're right, he comes in and he dominates us, and he's the guy you got to watch out for.
You can't let look, Adam, we're all going to take Aaron Donald very, very seriously, but one man can't beat a team, surely. The Seahawks have got too much on offense. You'd like to think they've got too many weapons. They've had a whole off-season to come up with a game plan to make sure that Aaron Donald doesn't wreck this game. Surely they're just going to handle the business here. And to an extent, they don't have to do anything that spectacular. They just have to sort of avoid errors and get the ball into the hands of DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Jackson Smith, and Jigba, Jake Bobo, their star receiver, and get this running game going, because they've just got too much. There are too many good weapons there. I kind of compare it to, and I know that obviously the Eagles were in the Super Bowl last year, and that's not a comparison with the Seahawks, but if the Rams are playing the Eagles, of course you could say, well, look, the Rams, yeah, Aaron Donald, he'll keep them in it. But you would then just list and reel off all of the explosive offensive options that the Eagles have got and say they're just going to have too much for them. Surely the Seahawks have got to go into this game, Adam, and just have too much for the Rams. Too many good skill players for this to be a game that they're going to end up dropping.
Obviously, that is the correct and logical factor. But the thing that I can never shake, and it's one of those images that is burnt on my brain, and I don't know if other people will remember, but it must have been 2013, the last home game of that season, or maybe penultimate. The St. Louis Rams under Jeff Fisher doled out Russell Wilson's first home loss. And all I can remember is Chris Long standing on the opposition bench, facing the fans on the far sides of the camera and just waving everyone off. And the number of times that the Seahawks played a Jeff Fisher Rams team, albeit, a different prefix from the city. And ever since then, they've just become one of those teams that I just can never, I can't accept that we're going into this game and we've got better players, therefore we should roll them over. There's just been too many examples of exactly what you've said. Well, we've got much better players, so we're going to batter them. I mean, there was the 9-7 game, whatever it was, I think in the same year, in the home game. There was the Austin Davis game. There was with the fake punt, I think, to Tavon Austin, where the camera went to the wrong side and then there was a touchdown. There was the Nick Foles game when Cam Chancellor was holding out. I mean, obviously those games typically have been in St. Louis or, the odd one in Seattle, but I'd be more confident almost facing the Chiefs this week at home than I am the Rams, just because of what that name does to me. It sends shivers down my spine, and it's just not the kind of thing that I can take for granted, albeit obviously man for man, you would take the Seahawks roster 10 times out of 10.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from, Adam, and I do remember in 2013. Can you remember that game? It was Monday Night Football, and then this is the ultimate Seahawks roster. This is the Super Bowl winning season. This is the season when this point was made a few times actually at the end of that season that the Seahawks probably should have gone unbeaten in that season, the 2013 season. They were too good. The fact that they actually managed to chuck 3 games away in the regular season is actually, they could have gone unbeaten all the way through. I mean, including preseason, all the way through. They just had so much talent. There was a legit chance for that. And yet in that 2013 game on Monday Night Football, the Rams had, I can't remember who they had starting at quarterback. I think maybe the quarterback got injured and they had to bring just some random dude, like it was like one of us was playing quarterback. And the Seahawks couldn't get out of their own 20, their own red zone.
I think their baseball team was playing in the World Series at the same time, and no one even cared about the result of the football game.
Yeah, there was nobody there. There was nobody in the stadium. It felt like a coast, like you were just going to turn it on for a nice relaxing 1 a.m. start for us. And then but it ended up being one of the most stressful games that I can remember following the Seahawks, because it was the goal line stand in the dying seconds of the game. Brandon Browner, I think, batted a pass down in the end zone, and the Seahawks squeezed out. That was the Golden Tate waving off play. They basically needed that 70-yard bit of a fluky play in order to win that one, and that's the Rams, isn't it, Robbie? Adam is right. That has been the Rams under Jeff Fisher and Sean McVay. For whatever reason, there's a bit of voodoo there with this team, isn't there? They just seem to almost be Seattle's. I don't know if you have this term, but we come like a bogey team in England. That's what you would call a team that you never win against. So there's been a bit of that with the Rams.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up Jeff Fisher, because that's like, he was always a real pain in the ass. I always hated when we played the Rams, and just like this, like what Adam was saying, the punt where the camera went the wrong way, and I think we even copied that a few years later, just like things like that. And this is always the beginning of the season is always really tough when you're playing, especially a divisional opponent right out the gate. You know each other so well. It's like you wonder who's got like that, that special play that they've been saving and practicing that's brand new that you're not going to see. And speaking of coaches, McVay's just got that. He's just got that talent, where he can exploit things. So I wonder if there's something there. But I think overall, just the way I feel about it, the Rams, I just don't feel like they're that great of a team. They're missing a lot of pieces. I think our offense should be able to get going, and first game, home crowd, hopefully it benefits. I want to say home crowd, but that just doesn't seem like a thing anymore, right? So I would hope, though, that would be a benefit for us.
Robbie, who do you want to start at center? Who would you like to see? Because we're talking about Aaron Donald here, but who would you, out of the 2 options, who are you wanting to see start at center? Evan Brown or the rookie Oluwatimi?
I mean, I want Evan Brown right now, just because I feel like he might have a little bit. He's got more experience. I don't want Ola going up his first matchup against Aaron Donald and having that be his first test, and coming out the gate being kind of intimidated and nervous. And I feel like that's just set up for disaster. I think you start Evan Brown and let him kind of have that like veteran presence.
Adam, can I ask you the same question? Because I disagree with Robbie. I want Oluwatimi to start. I think that they've drafted him to start. I don't really see much benefit of protecting him from certain opponents. He's gonna come into NFL. He's gonna play players like Aaron Donald. Like just let him go and learn. Let him go and experience what that's like. In week 2, he won't be facing Aaron Donald, so it's already an easier. He benefits from that experience. The way that they talk about him, I think they view him as a longer term solution. I think that they firmly believe that he can do what Abe Lucas did a year ago and be a mid-round-ish player who comes in and starts and plays at a competent level. So I get Robbie's point. He's a bit more experienced, but Evan Brown is also a player who's not left a mark on the NFL and has been in the league for a while. So do you go with the player who could be the just go straight away, Adam, with a player who could be a start of a cheap cost for the next 4 years and hopefully beyond, or do you protect him somewhat and play the other guy and ease him in? What do you think?
It's such a difficult one, and you're never really going to be able to offer a correct answer until the game itself pans out. I suppose if you see this position on Sunday as a semi-sacrificial lamb, we don't know what these guys are like from a mental standpoint. Brown strikes me as the sort of Luke Jokel kind of signing that you've signed and you feel almost obliged to play them because you paid some money to bring in an older guy that deep down is not going to do the job, but he's there now, so we might as well give him a go. Whereas Olu, it's tricky because I remember all the great Seattle teams, they made it a famous point of saying that the hardest these guys ever have to play is in practice against each other, and the practice is so hard that the games almost become easy. Now, I don't know if Olu is the kind of guy that you can say to him, look, you're going to struggle today and it's not going to be easy, but we're going to stick with you and we want to see how you cope against this best defensive player of all time, perhaps. And you don't know how mentally the guy's going to deal with it. So I suppose you have to look at it and think, if you're going to kill the guy mentally, then don't do it. But the chances are that the Seahawks have drafted the guy, gone through all the personality traits, and that they would imagine he's confident in himself. But it's going to be one of those questions that we discuss on Sunday night, thinking, well, that was the right decision or the wrong decision based on what we see. And I'd probably go with you that I'd start the kid and say, look, it's your job. You're going to have some stumbles, but don't worry, we're going to stick with you. But equally, it would be a fairly cowardly decision, I guess, to sort of play it on the safer side and protect the kid. When it's hard to argue against that, I would say. Much like it's not the way I would go, I think.
I would worry that, like, if for any reason he started and let's say he was struggling early and they're having to slide extra guard protection in to help him out, which you're probably gonna have to do anyway. But if you have to alter the game plan for how you're gonna run the offense just to help him out, I feel like that could be an issue. But I mean, you never know. I mean, he could come in and dominate. We started someone just said we started two rookies last year. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I could see both sides of it. I feel like if you don't have to and you've got the experience there, why push it? But that's just my opinion.
I think my prediction, and we'll see, we'll find out on Sunday. I think Oluwatimi is going to start. I think they've spoken so positively about him. I think they have always intended for him to start, and I think that Evan Brown was a cheap hedge, who's got versatility, can play guard, he can play center, and I think that they value that on a game day. But I think that they've viewed I think Oluwatimi was probably their target for that position in the draft. They've got him. Well, we have to remember with him, this is a player he's an older player. He's played a lot of games in college. He was part of an award-winning offensive line at Michigan. I think they won back-to-back years, like the O-line of college football. He's played in huge games within college football, not just in the Big Ten, but also in the college football playoffs. So he's been around the block. And the one thing that people were saying about him is, one, it's consistency. He's a no-frills type of player, but he's very consistent. And the other thing is incredibly mature and switched on. And I think that is why he's going to start. I don't think they all feel like they need to protect him. And somebody mentioned in the comments, well, he's had a bit of an injury, but you also have to remember he played a large bulk of the Green Bay game, the final preseason game, off the back of having recovered from that injury. He then dominated in the game alongside Anthony Bradford. They had a fantastic game. Carroll then spoke glowingly about him in his press conference and said that he was really impressed with the way that he said, I'm playing, I'm healthy, get me out there, I'm playing. And then he went and played at the level that he did. So I actually think, and that was 2 weeks ago now. So I think Oluwatimi is going to start. And I hope he does start. And I genuinely think, look, they threw Abe Lucas and Charles Cross out there last year. And I think they will have no issue putting Oluwatimi in there as well this year. I think, and I want to see that. I want to see him get on against Aaron Donald. And if it goes badly, well, it's a good lesson for him. Sometimes you need to take some lumps. Anyway, usually we save predictions to the end, but I kind of want to go into some general topics based around the Seahawks and their season and kind of what we're expecting this year. But for that reason, I kind of want to draw a line under this game. Robbie, who do you think is going to win? What have you got a prediction for this game?
Yeah, I think Seahawks are going to win. I just don't think the Rams are good enough. I think all the weapons we have on offense, I think we're going to struggle on the defensive side of the ball, and it's going to be super frustrating. But I think ultimately, just being at home, first game of the season, I think we take it.
And what do you think the score's going to be? Because it's important to have a score, Robbie, to know how confident you feel.
Oh, let's see, 24-17.
Okay, one score game.
Yep.
Adam?
I have 27-17, 3 points more for the Seahawks. I think it's going to end up being, it might be, within a field goal going into the fourth quarter, standard. I think they'll pull away, and it'll end being sort of feeling like a very satisfactory day.
I am going to go for. I'm going to be a bit more confident here, and I am going to go for 30 points to 13. And I think it'll be close for a while, but then I think the Seahawks will accelerate away towards the end, and it will be that comforting win. I was telling Adam off air that I'm not actually going to be able to watch the game because I'm broadcasting on national radio over here, and I'm being treated to the Packers against the Bears, which does not. It doesn't scream pulsating game, but I'm still looking forward to seeing it, and I'll keep an eye on the score for the Seahawks, and I'll watch it through afterwards. But we'll still do the live stream afterwards. It's just that I'll need some assistance on describing the action, but hopefully it will be that comfortable win, and we'll have lots of positive things to talk about. So join us for that after the game. So there's a few things I want to talk about the Seahawks. I very quickly want to just talk about the rest of the NFC West, because it feels like we've talked about the Rams there. Nick Bosa's obviously signed his new contract today. It's a mega deal. It's blown all of the other contracts out of the water. The Panthers will be cursing the Niners because they're trying to get a deal done with Brian Burns, and this will make that incredibly difficult now. But the interesting thing is that the Niners are actually $7 million over the cap for next year. So they're already in some kind of cap issues for the future. Nick Bosa's contract's going to go on top of that $7 million because he's not on the books at the minute. So now that's going to mean whatever his cap hit next year is on top of that. They can cut Arik Armstead or Trent Williams and save some money. They can't save any money with Christian McCaffrey. They'll only save $1.2 million to cut him. So they actually don't have much freedom in terms of pulling levers to create cap space. So the reason I'm bringing all this up, guys, is because my question to you is, are the Niners, as much as people think the Niners are locked and loaded for years to come, are they actually reaching a point here where their window might close quite quickly if all of a sudden, Trent Williams isn't getting any younger, Arik Armstead's not getting any younger, they're now having to pay people like Bosa. They've paid Hargrave an absolute ton of money. They've been very aggressive in their salary construction now, and yet they are dependent on Brock Purdy and Sam Darnold and people like that at quarterback. Where do we think the Niners are? Because I can't decide whether they are just going to, it doesn't matter who plays quarterback. Kyle Shanahan will get them going, and the rest of the roster is so good that they're going to win the NFC West, possibly the number one seed in the NFC, and be really good. And I also can't decide whether or not it's a desperate kind of like they've got to do it now or maybe next year or that's it. Or maybe they've missed the boat already. I don't know. Robbie, what are your thoughts on the Niners?
Well, I don't think they've missed the boat. I think, the fact that they have a rookie, a 7th round rookie, no less, starting for them is a big benefit. I know they're, like you said, they're $9 million over the cap, even just now as of for next year. But we've seen the Rams finagle it and work things around. I'm sure there's people they can, restructure contracts and do things that are gonna, help them going forward. I think they're still a team. I think they're maybe 2 or 3 years away before I see any sort of maybe decline, if that. I mean, this is pretty solid roster, and as you said, Shanahan's he's a good coach, so I think he's going to have his guys ready to go.
The problem is like their O-line, Williams aside, looks suspect. Like, they don't have any surefire players apart. I mean, it was great to have Trent Williams, but they haven't got anybody else really. They've obviously got weapons, but then Debo's been hurt at times, Kittle's been hurt at times, Ayuk is hit and miss. Christian McCaffrey was very healthy last year, but has obviously had injury issues in his career. Brock Purdy's coming off an injury. Defense, you look at the D-line, obviously very good, but then, your Fred Warners are no longer those magical mid-round picks who are providing great value and performance. Then he's now becoming a player who's in the second half of his career now and is earning a lot of money. And, they've got some good players in the secondary, but also you've got players who were kind of a bit up and down last year. Adam, where do you view the Niners? Because I find it really hard. Like, I've got Niners friends and they're sort of licking the chops about playing the Steelers this weekend. I think we'll learn a lot about the Niners in this game because this is a losable game and a winnable game at the same time, if that makes any sense. I think we will probably learn quite a lot about them there.
Yeah, I think the Steelers are going to be really good as well. So I think the challenge there is exacerbated by the fact that they're not just a name. I think the Steelers have got a heck of a good roster that they're forming. The thing I can't get my head around with the Niners is that people have sort of vaulted Brock Purdy to a position where, like, oh yeah, don't worry about him. He's a surefire thing. I mean, obviously he won 6 games in a row, and that's not to be sniffed at. But I don't know, like, is every scout going to be that far wrong with this guy to the point where he has just blown them all out the water with what his ability is versus the evaluation? It's not beyond the realms that, we've seen loads of times where quarterbacks, have a good little run and then they get found out. And I'm just surprised that Brock Purdy is sort of being just ticked off as, well, we don't have to worry about quarterback. We've got Brock Purdy. For me, it wouldn't surprise me at all if he had a bump, and that really derailed them, because there is only so much they can do if they get bad quarterback play with the way in which they're constructed. And I think that's something that I'm certainly looking out for. I mean, if Purdy's great this year, then, it's one of the greatest picks of all time, and whoever picked him up is a genius. But I don't know. I just think that there's this assumption that Purdy is being talked about as this surefire starting quarterback. Don't worry about him. That strikes me as very presumptuous.
And then you've got the Cardinals, who they're a very confusing team. So you've got all this stuff going on in the background about when the GM was suspended and being investigated, and burner phones for the coaches and all of that. You've got an ownership that have never been anything to celebrate. You've now got a head coach who was seemingly one of the hot candidates during the cycle. Teams are interested in him. He had a good spell with the Eagles. And and look, it's hard to judge these guys immediately because Nick Sirianni, when he came in Philadelphia, absolutely shat his cakes when he did his first press conference, and looked like it was as if they'd put a small child out there to speak to the press. And yet he, within no time at all, had got the Eagles within a whisper of winning a Super Bowl. So you can't judge too much on that. But I did find it quite interesting, Robbie, that Mike Florio wrote an article and he compared Deion Sanders' pre-game speech to his Colorado players with the video that the Cardinals have put out, with Jonathan Gannon essentially giving a very turgid, tepid speech to a bunch of bored players who looked about as engaged as I do when my wife puts something on Netflix in the background. So it was a hard watch. So you kind of look at them. They've got rid of Colt McCoy, who would have been, I don't know, average for them maybe, and then they trade for Josh Dobbs and bring him in, and he's starting now. Everything's looks like it's been set up for an epic tank, and then just as that's about to kick off and the tank is being processed, Caleb Williams comes out, the USC quarterback, and goes, "Yeah, well, I don't think it's fair that I have to go and play for the number 1 overall team, and maybe I'll stay at USC for another year." Or, there's this, was he going to do an Elway and an Eli and say, no, I'm not going to you guys? So they look like an absolute shambles at the moment, like a total and utter joke. I think with Robbie, week 1's weird in the NFL. You can always have a puncher's chance, as I mentioned. But after that, they could go, at the moment, they're giving off an 0-16 vibe or 0-17 vibe. Like a serious, it's hard to go winless. But Robbie, if anybody's going to go winless, it kind of looks like they might.
Yeah, this team is an absolute dumpster fire. I can't figure them out at all. And you got to wonder kind of just what Kyler Murray's thinking. I think he wanted to be traded or some shenanigans, and Buda Baker wanted to be traded. No one wants to play there right now, and I don't blame Caleb Williams at all for not wanting to play there. I wouldn't want to play there either. So, yeah, this is going to be a team that's going to be. They'll either surprise us and win like 6 games, or they're just going to. They're not going to win one. So,
yeah, I think the only chance they've got, Adam, is to just embrace everything that's going to be bad about this year. Probably then fire the coach as a one and done, which they've done with Steve Wilkes. They did that a few years ago. Maybe they have to do that again. And then the only chance they will have to recover as a franchise is to recruit the heck out of Caleb Williams for a start. I don't know how easy it is to get out of Kyler Murray's deal, but they'd have to do that, obviously, if they're going to draft a quarterback first overall. And then they'd have to, in order to recruit him and in order to get the franchise going again, they'd almost have to do something that I can't really imagine what it would be to get the franchise back. Do you know what? It would probably mean, as daft as this sounds, I don't think it sounds that daft, actually, given the way his career's gone so far. It'd probably mean having to just back up a huge truckload of money and somehow convince someone like Deion Sanders to come to Arizona so that they can have all of the hype and the energy and the media attention that would come with that, so that players would actually want to go and play there. Because right now, no one's going to want to play in Arizona. It looks like a total mess.
The only thing that I could say to even begin to caveat is that it looked so bad in that room with Jonathan Gannon, and everyone's faces was so dejected that I wonder if there was like some creative editing going in to make it look that bad. Because otherwise, who has signed off on hiring this guy? Like, if he's that, demotivating, you can't believe that anyone would even give him a job in the first place. So I'm just wondering if it's one of those things where, a TV guy has done a particularly good job of, picking out the glum faces in the silent parts because I was dumbfounded watching that. And in a way, I actually thought some of the stuff he was saying wasn't so bad, but then it was panning to these just blank faces of, you can imagine what books Michael Bennett would have been reading in those sorts of meetings, given what he was doing with Pete Carroll. So that's the only thing that I can say, that it has someone just done them over and made it look that bad, because otherwise, what the hell is he doing as a head coach?
Perhaps you might have a point. I mean, look, that clip, if it was slightly better, would have got no traction. Everyone would have just completely ignored it. The fact that it was so boring and painful to watch has actually got people discussing it, which almost makes you think that might be a good marketing tip. If this program is rubbish, let's just make it look worse so that people will give it a chance, even if they only watch I don't know how many episodes it is, or whether it's just one big episode. I have no idea. But either way, just no skin off our nose, but it is a franchise that just looks hopeless. We've had a super chat from Jason. Great show as always. Regarding Caleb and the Cards, what is your guys' opinion on the NFL having a draft lottery? Imagine the drama, says Jason. Thank you for the super chat. Get those super chats in. I'm not against it, Robbie. I don't think I'd ever go out of my way to sort of lead a chorus for a draft lottery. To me, I always find the draft lottery stuff, like when the NHL and the NBA ones come around, people seem to spend more time talking about which team's going to get screwed and which one's going to get the favoritism from the league. And you can just imagine it, can't you? Like a Cowboys or somebody suddenly going from 10th overall to 1st because someone like Caleb Williams is there, and everyone having an absolute meltdown because they're determining that the Cowboys have got it because it's the Cowboys. That to me, Robbie, would just be so frustrating to live in that world within the NFL if that happened. But at the same time, it really is hard to argue against the idea that there should be at least a threat of you can't just tank. That you can tank and tank and tank, and you might still end up with a 4th overall pick and completely out of the top 3. That does feel like if the Cardinals are intent on going all in for number 1, probably there does need to be some pushback against that.
Yeah, that would be my only argument for actually doing a draft lottery. I actually really don't like it in the NBA even. It kind of drives me nuts. I feel bad for those teams who just really need it. And, get someone like the Spurs who have had, they had one bad year with Dave Robinson. All of a sudden they get Tim Duncan as well. And all of a sudden they're just like this major powerhouse. And again, this last year they got their first overall pick. It just does for me. I'm not a huge draft lottery guy, but my only argument for that would be against, the tanking aspect of it. But I think it's really hard to tank, like legit tank. Like I think we saw it last year. Like I think it's just tough to do. I don't know.
And the other thing is
teams that are playing like really bad and like, in general, like which team's tanking worse, I don't know. I think it's tough to do.
And the other thing we have to remember with this is whatever the draft, what's a lottery pick? Is like a top 10 pick or something. I'm not a big NBA fan. And what you might end up having are teams tanking who are in the middle of the pack to get into the draft lottery sort of position, as well as the team who is at number 1 overall who wants the better odds of getting the number 1 overall pick. So you might actually get more teams tanking or trying to jockey for position there. I don't know. I guess they could do that anyway. But if you know that, well, if we just lose a bit and get 10 overall, we might get 1 overall, then that might be more incentive than 15 to 12, for example. I don't know. But either way.
So I think just to interject, I think the Caleb thing is made more interesting by the fact that he's probably going to come out of college as a millionaire, which is, not happened in the history of the draft, up to the NIL years. And so this idea that players have to be so grateful for where they end up, I do think you're going to start seeing these guys that are already independently wealthy maybe be a bit more discerning. Like someone like Trevor Lawrence could have had his entire career ruined by being just plonked with Urban Meyer. You look at someone like Sam Darnold, who ended up in just an awful situation. And I'm taking off track here, but I do think it's going to be interesting to see how the next decade goes by way of these guys that are wealthy within their own rights, that they might just start saying, I'm not going to play for you. Work it out, but I'm not going there.
I think that's very possible. I think it will possibly happen next year because, yes, it sounds great for Caleb Williams to go back to USC and have another year. And what if the Cardinals just tank again? You've just wasted a year of getting into the league. And there are financial benefits beyond just the contract of being in the NFL. There are a lot of perks that come with, marketing of being an NFL player and the number 1 overall pick. And the other thing I would say that is a pushback against all of this is people could easily have made the argument that Joe Burrow going to the Bengals would be a death sentence for his career. But he's been to a Super Bowl and is sort of turned that franchise around. And you could say you're starting to see that maybe there's some green shoots in Jacksonville as well. And everyone would have thought that Trevor Lawrence going there would have been a disaster for him. So it's not automatic that if you go to a terrible franchise that it's going to be bad. And I actually quite like that part of the NFL that somebody like the Bengals can have that bit of hope, and the Jaguars fans can have that bit of hope. However bad those franchises may be run, at least the fans who are kind of stuck with their teams, they can't just move off and trade that team for a better team, go and be a Chiefs fan. That they actually have that hope that their team can get that superstar who turns it around. And I suppose the Cardinals fans deserve that opportunity as much as anybody else. And maybe Caleb Williams could be the guy who does that. He's a very special player. He's going to be the number 1 overall pick. Maybe I'll just have 5 minutes on the draft at the end because I've spent the last few days doing a lot of work on that. Okay. This is the section of the stream where I'm going to talk about the defensive line. I don't know if you guys have heard any of this. So John Schneider did a press conference this week, and then he did an interview with Dave Wyman and Bob Stelton on 710 Seattle Sports. And in both conversations, he made reference to the same line. And I don't think that's a coincidence, which was essentially to stress that there aren't many interior linemen, offense and defense, coming into the league. That essentially there's a short supply of defensive tackles. That was his point. And I think he's stressing that in these two press conferences. I also want to make a point that I think is really interesting, again, that he is, if you notice during the draft, he did a weekly show on 710. He did a lot more media work. He was the first person to be a guest on the Combine coverage with Rich Eisen and Daniel Jeremiah. He is doing a lot more media, and he's never done a week of the season starting press conference before and then an interview on the radio. So there is definitely a reason why he's doing more interviews, and I'm going to come on to that in a second. But I think he was getting the message out there to Seahawks fans. I hear you. The defensive line is not what it needs to be, but I think his message is there's not much we could have done about it. That yes, people will make the argument, they should have drafted Jalen Carter, or they should have spent that second round pick on a defensive lineman instead of Zach Charbonnet or Derek Hall, for example. And those arguments will be made by fans and whatever. I think he's saying it is what it is, essentially. So with that in mind, Robbie, what do you make of that?
I mean, I think he's probably heard just as much as we have. I mean, saying exactly what you just said. It is what it is. And I mean, you can't magically make a defensive tackle appear that's going to be available and pay him the right amount, and he's going to be a stud on your interior line for you. So, I mean, on one hand, like you said, there are other things they could have done in the draft, but they're going to go out and do what they can with the players that they have and see what happens. I worry that it is going to be like I said on our last podcast, this is going to be a talking point all year. This is going to be something that we will bring up all year.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I suppose when he's making that argument, Adam, I have some sympathy with it, because I generally think the draft went quite well. I didn't expect them to go into training camp or the season with the limited options that they've had, to have essentially only 2 players on the roster currently who were over 300 pounds, with the option of bringing up a nose tackle off the practice squad. And one of the 2 that are on the roster has been injured for most of training camp and hasn't barely played. It just seems somewhat inadequate, Adam. And when and I accept to an extent his opinion that there's maybe, if that's what it is, if I'm right on this, in parsing this, that there's not much else they could have done. I would also go back to my other bugbear, was that the highest paid player on the roster right now ain't playing this weekend. It's not obvious when he is going to be playing this weekend, at what level he is going to be playing at, and why wasn't more done to work on his deal to save a bit of money, to at least even get one more veteran in during free agency. Someone like a Greg Gaines, for example, who's from Washington, who played at Washington. Yeah, or maybe he just wanted to go and play with Vita Vea again in Tampa Bay, and that's that. But could you not have gone and got somebody like that, just so you've got one more player to rotate in the middle and give you a bit of extra beef? Because I just think that's possibly, Adam, the only thing that's missing on the roster.
Yeah, and another part of that is that I think I'm right in saying that Miles Adams is the only defensive lineman that's back on the roster this year that was there last year. I think every other player is gone. So, how do you look at that?
Brian Monet, but he's injured.
Yeah, sorry, that's available to sort of go. But so how do you look at that? Do you think that it's either, and I guess I'm answering a question with a question, but is it that they thought the defensive line was so bad last year that, rolling the dice, jumbling everyone into a bag and just, tipping out and seeing what you end up with is a better alternative than trying to go again? Or is it a case of they're just saying, look, there just aren't the players and we're going to have to mitigate that by doing good things everywhere else? Because, the defensive line, especially against the run in certain games, I think it basically lost us every game against the NFC South last year. All 4 games were basically lost in that position, outside of a bit of sort of Taysom Hill nonsense. And the Raiders game as well. How many streams did we come on and say, oh my goodness, they just couldn't stop the run. It was dreadful. So I get, we knew it was a problem last year. they're making it a problem this year, but they didn't bring back any one of the players that you would have thought maybe could have, they weren't all bad players last year. I didn't think, Al Woods has gone, Poona Ford has gone, Shelby Harris has gone, albeit, there was systemic issues with him apparently, which someone that knows a lot more than me will be able to explain. But I don't know, what's he trying to say by, well, it is what it is? Because there are a number of ways that it could have been different, and they've kind of ended up where they are by choice. And so it's what the reasoning for that is what I can't really work out.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and it just feels like they've fully intend, and we've been in this position before. They had a full intention of sorting this out. I think you have to give them credit. I think the Draymond Jones signing and the Jaron Reed signings were a great start, but for me it was like, wow, what a great start. And then, well, nothing's happened since. And the problem is going to be probably not so much against the Rams this weekend, because if the Seahawks get a lead, which is not beyond the realms of possibility that the Seahawks get a couple of scores ahead quite early in this game, the Rams aren't going to be able to just run and be patient with that. And the Seahawks can sort of play that if they do. But there are going to be games this year where teams are just going to come out like the Buccaneers did in Munich, and they are just going to try and pummel the Seahawks up front. And it's not just the lack of size, because people are, there are people out there, they do this. They kind of do, I think they are a little generous in how they review certain things about the Seahawks. I'm seeing people talking about, why this will be okay or why that'll be okay. Let's just think about what you've got here. You've got a light interior where Jaron Reed is really he's your nose tackle, and he hasn't been really a nose tackle in his career. And then off the edge, you are basically playing 3-4 3-4 outside linebackers as defensive ends. Now, you could mix that up. You could say, okay, we're going to play Jaron Reed and Miles Adams, and then we're going to play Draymond Jones as an end, and we're going to play the other guys. For some reason, my memory is shocking. Mario Edwards Jr. off the other. And I guess that's you're playing 2-5 techniques and 2 defensive tackles, and it's a bigger box. But then you haven't got any speed on the edge. So maybe you feel like you can pass in that situation if the Seahawks give you that look. But if you're going to play Jones and Reed in the middle with Boya Mafe, who's about 250 pounds, and Daryl Taylor, who's probably about something similar, or Uchenna and Wosu off the edge, how are you going to set the edge? How are you going to protect the interior? That is a line, Robbie, that is begging to be run on, isn't it? Let's be honest here. That is a line that is saying, come after us. And it seems as if they're adapting the scheme almost away from an orthodox 3-4 because they know it doesn't work. And yet all of their personnel off the edge has been drafted or signed for that system. And yet they don't have a classic big-bodied nose tackle or anything like that who can just be a space eater. And I don't know how you get that player now, Robbie. That player doesn't seem to exist in free agency on waivers or via trade.
Yeah, well, we needed to save the money, honestly, for all the safeties we have. So that's why they're doing that. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, there's so many different things they could have done that they didn't. I mean, the fact that this will be year 2, it'll be something that we talked about. Like Adam said last year, we came on and complained about it. And we even saw it during the preseason when they started running. They just didn't seem like we could tackle for the life of us. And then there were just big holes. It's a very confusing situation, and to see that it's going to be another year of probably repeated conversations that we had last year. It gets kind of frustrating, to have the same conversations over and over.
It does. It feels like a bit of a half job. It was so. I can remember I was in the gym, I think, when Draymond Jones was announced, and I was just about to go, and it was like, wow, yes, this is amazing quality. They signed somebody they've needed that kind of player. And then Jaron Reed came in and thinking, oh, God, this is really proactive. It's really good. And then you kind of looked at the cap situation and thought, well, they haven't got much money left now. Is that, how are they going to do this? Then they started cutting everybody. And then you're like, okay, they've cut everybody. Like, what's going to happen here? And then it was either the assumption was that Al Woods might come back or Shelby Harris might come back or somebody else. Poona Ford might eventually come back. None of those players came back, and they just didn't sign anybody else. And now, they draft Cam Young, who I really like, and Mike Morris, and hopefully he can sort of settle into this bigger role that he's playing. But I'll say it. I've said it in an article, and I'll say it again now. If Jarran Reed gets injured, what are they going to do? I don't understand how this defense can function if Jarran Reed goes out. And I do worry, guys, that he's more likely to get injured if he's having to play 80% of the snaps or something stupid like that, because they don't really have anybody who can do his role in relief. So it is a bit of a concern. Ryan Pearson, a super chat in. As our defense is currently constructed, what needs to be true for the Hawks to be a 10 to 18 ranked in points per game, in your opinion? It's an interesting question. Have you got a thought, Adam, on what needs to happen for the defense to succeed? I think more or less, to show real, genuine improvement this season.
I think the whole of the back end will have to be exactly as advertised, if not better. A lot of people are probably lazily, but not deliberately. I just think it's a cute thing to say, LOB2 with the secondary they've constructed. But I also, I was listening to Seattle radio last week, and one of the hosts said, well, look, they've got 3 great inside linebackers. And he meant Bobby Wagner, Jordan Brooks, and Devin Bush. And his Devin Bush reasoning was, well, he was a first-round pick at Pittsburgh. That must have been a reason for that. This is also a bit of a homer that mentioned this, but I think people are assuming that Bobby Wagner is going to be amazing again. And I hope he is, and he's undoubtedly going to be a terrific team leader, and the vibes that he's bringing back are clearly good. But his best days are obviously behind him as a player, given his age. And so, if the defensive line aren't good and we're going to get run on, it's probably quite a lot to ask of the guy, to be this bedrock of a defense that's going to be good. But if we're trying to answer the question that Ryan, I think, asked, then that's going to have to happen. The linebackers are going to be good, and the pass rush, you're going to have to get Boye Mafe that they've been talking to us about. You're going to have to get Uchenna having the season he had last year, and Darrell Taylor probably having the sacks he had last year, but also performances to back that up. Because I think we could probably all say that last year he had a disappointing season in spite of quite impressive sack numbers. I think you probably need more from him there. So I think the defensive line is probably going to be what it's going to be. Hopefully Draymond Jones plays up to his contract and more, but I think the rest, the other 8 are going to need to be terrific, I would say. And I don't think that's impossible, but I think that's going to have to happen if we're going to, certainly from a point standpoint, be sort of well above average.
I mean, you make a good point there, Adam. I mean, like last year, how many times did we say this team doesn't need to, the defense didn't need to be great. It just needed to be average. It just needed to be average, and that was it. Like, if we could have just had an average defense, we would have won more games. We would have been in a better position. So if the team can just have, if the defense can just be average and the offense can be clicking like it was last year, or even better, then I mean that's a a significant improvement compared to where we were last year.
I've to answer the question. I mean, firstly, I think Adam makes a great point that we haven't really touched on. Is Bobby Wagner? He's the reason why he left Seattle and was cut. Let's not forget that he was cut. Is because he had a couple of years where his play really dipped. One, because they messed him around trying to blitz the A gap, as Hugh Millen broke down very well, to set up opportunities for Jamal Adams as a free runner off the edge as a blitzer. Now they might start doing that again. That could impact Wagner's play. And then the other thing is the D-line did not keep him clean, and he was getting attacked to that second level. And a light D-line, again, could get exposed, and it doesn't matter how good the linebackers are. I mean, saying that they've got 3 excellent, they've got a guy who's basically got injured and did nothing in Pittsburgh and was a bust for them. You've got Jordan Brooks, who might be one of the most overrated players that I've covered as writing the blog, because he's basically a bog standard linebacker, in my opinion. He just doesn't make any difference making plays. He's a former first rounder. He's coming off a serious injury. I'm not sure you could call him a brilliant, fantastic linebacker. And then you've got Bobby Wagner, who is clearly a very good player, returned to form last year, but they didn't get to bring Aaron Donald with him to Seattle. So, we'll see how he does with this D-line in front of him. And I think the answer to the question that I would suggest is trade for a defensive tackle. I don't think I don't know if this can be what needs to happen is the edge rushers have to be unbelievable. And you have to accept that maybe your run defense isn't going to be very good. Your pass rush has to be elite. And it has to combine with fantastic secondary play. Now, they've got a lot of talent in the secondary. And they've got, I think, good edge rushers for the first time in a long time. A good rotation of those guys. I think they have to be very creative with the way they use their rushers. I enjoyed seeing some stunts in preseason. And I think they've got to try and use some of those and manufacture some pressures and use that speed off the edge. And they've just got to hope that sort of equalizes the difference that they're probably not going to be a great run defense. I hope so. I think that's probably the way that I would answer that. Very quickly on Schneider, because I appreciate we're already 56 minutes in. I'm going to pitch something to you guys. I think John Schneider is doing, I think we've mentioned this slightly in the past. I think the reason he's doing more interviews is a big tell that a team, a franchise sale is closer than some journalists will have you believe, some local journalists. I think he has felt like he needs to become more of a face and a voice of this franchise because he thinks that a new owner is going to come in and he wants to, it's basically the Pete Carroll show, isn't it? And he wants a bit of the limelight. He wants a bit of that attention so that he is seen to be a big part of this when the owner comes in, so that he can be a big part of the future. I think it might make no difference. I'm not suggesting that a new owner is going to come in and get rid of him if he didn't do this. I'm just saying I don't think it hurts to be a bit more of a public face and a bit more of a voice within the team. A lot of GMs do regular radio shows and press conferences. He never has. I think he started doing that because a team sale is coming up and he wants prospective billionaire owners to know who he is. That's my opinion. What do you think?
I mean, I agree with you. I also think that, his contract goes 1 year longer than Pete Carroll's. I think he probably wants to be around long enough to hire his own coach once Pete goes as well. And when the owner comes in, the owner comes in and gives, John Snyder that ability, I think that he wants that. And I think, like you said, if he's having more visibility and making himself more well known, not that his resume doesn't speak for himself, but having that presence and attitude to kind of show that you're a leader, within the organization. I think it extends beyond just the ownership. I think it extends to the fact of, giving him the ability to go beyond hiring his own coach and those things.
And that's the thing though, Adam, isn't it? Because we all know who John Schneider is, obviously, and most diehard NFL fans will be well aware of who the Seahawks GM is because of the success that the Seahawks have had. He's a Super Bowl winning GM and created and helped create this amazing team in the early 2010s. But that doesn't mean that Jeff Bezos knows who he is or whoever else might be buying this team who's not maybe a massive NFL fan, but just fancies the idea of joining in this money tree that is the NFL. And sort of being part of that. I think it's fair to say that a lot of these billionaire owners might not be mad, crazy football fans. They might have a bit of interest in football. Some of them obviously live and breathe it. I think it's fair to say Jerry Jones does, however mad he may be. But others will just have a sort of a passing cursory interest in the sport, or will not sort of know who front office personnel necessarily are. And I think that Schneider's doing this to elevate his profile before a sale. And I think that sale is coming. I think it's next year, isn't it? Where the deal that prevents the Seahawks essentially from selling the team without having to pay a load of money to the council, I think it is, as part of that agreement, that runs out next year. And I suspect that probably within the next 18 months, we may start to see serious movement on a team sale, Adam.
Yeah, I honestly hadn't thought about that at all. It's a really interesting point when you put it that way. I suppose in speaking to a couple of journalists in the past, I've always asked them, well, why don't the Seahawks kick money down the road, extend these contracts and renegotiate? And the answer I always got back was that owners that maybe looking to sell at some point in the future don't want to have guaranteed money locked up for years and years down the line in order to free it up now. So perhaps that's another thing that kind of corroborates. I mean, I guess in my mind, I always figured that from a John Schneider profile, was it 2 years ago that there was the talk about the Lions sniffing around him? And I don't know, maybe it's just after a couple of good drafts back to back, he's sort of feeling himself and wants to put himself front and center, that when someone's looking for a general manager and perhaps, a general manager plus, as such, he wants to be front and center of any discussions that teams are having. But it certainly makes sense that I guess it's two sides of the same coin. One's for the Seahawks and other ones for any future rosters. But was there not an article recently that someone wrote for maybe it may have been Forbes or a financial newspaper in America that Jody Allen was almost saying that she's got no interest in selling, or it's not going to happen anytime soon? I mean, it's a mess, really, isn't it? And I don't really like having a silent owner at the best of times in any sport. It's a bit mucky, the whole thing. Right.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen that, and I think Greg Bell's been on this line that she's always insisted she's not going to sell. And people like Mike Florio have pointed out, yep, and the Seahawks always insisted they weren't ever going to trade Russell Wilson. So it's she can say other people have reported that essentially she's obliged to sell, eventually. Now there's maybe not a time scale on that, but I'm not an expert on these kind of inheriting a team and what you do with it. But I think I don't think the expectation from Paul Allen's behalf was ever that he passes and his sister runs the Trailblazers and the Seahawks until she fancies passing it on. I think that there's probably more of a time scale than is being discussed within the Seattle media. And certainly people like Florio and people like that, he's a former lawyer, he knows a lot about this. He's very much on the line that there'll be a sale sooner rather than later. I think that it's not a coincidence that one of the first things that Jody Allen did when she essentially took over was to give Carroll a contract extension until 2025. And, well, we're 2 years away from him being in the final year of his deal now. So at the end of this season, there will be 2 seasons to go. As I put up on there, somebody saying it's May 2nd when essentially the proper serious talks can happen about a sale. And my prediction would be that is between May 2nd, 2024 and probably sometime in 2025. That is when the team will be sold. So we will see. And that will change things dramatically in the world of the Seahawks. That's my prediction. Anyway, the final thing I want to discuss, and I'm sorry, I just want to check you guys are okay for time, because this is quite a chunky topic that I just wanted to finish with here, and it's going to upset some people. So there's your trigger warning. Okay. I want to ask you guys about your expectations for Geno Smith, because I was thinking about this a lot today, and I have a little bit of a concern. But it's not because I expect him to be bad. My fear with Geno Smith is that he's going to be okay. He's going to be pretty good. But then you've got a big call to make at the end of the year, because he can be pretty good and not great and be on the hook for near enough $40 million next year. And that's when things get tricky. Because if he's done okay, pretty good, middle of the pack for quarterbacks, what do you do then? How do you resolve a situation where he's suddenly on the hook for $40 million, but possibly isn't worth that much? And yet, are you going to cut him in that situation and just watch him walk down the road and be left with a bit of a potential black hole at the quarterback? Because Drew Lock's a free agent next year as well. So people can't just go, well, they'll just move to Drew Lock, because he will also be a free agent. There's no guarantee there. So as much as I think it was a good contract for the Seahawks to work out Geno Smith, good for both parties, on the days before the start of the season, I'm now thinking I want one of two extremes. I either want Geno Smith to be awful to make that decision easy, or I want him to be fantastic to make that decision easy. What I don't want is somewhere in between where we end up having to have a debate about whether or not it's worth keeping hold of him. Because because people may ask, I've seen a comment already, he's on the hook for $31.2 million next season. That's his cap hit. And there are $2 million worth of incentives. There are a series of incentives. He has to match his passing yards from last year to get $2 million. If the Seahawks win 9 games, he gets $2 million. 9 games isn't a lot of games. They won 9 games last year. If he matches his touchdowns from last year, it's $2 million. If he gets his completion percentage from last year, it's $2 million. So it's very easy to imagine a scenario where he plays okay and ends up with a contract that's worth $37 million next year. And that's when it becomes a huge talking point and a debate. Will he be worth a $40 million contract if he's only okay this year? I think that could end up being a big talking point. Robbie, what do you think?
Well, you just said 40 million, and for some reason that number in my head just doesn't seem that expensive anymore for a quarterback. It's like what Kirk Cousins is making and all these other guys, and it's only for one more year. I don't know. I mean, yes, I see what you're saying. I think, you having one or two of the extremes, either he dominates and it's totally worth it, or, he completely fails and it makes the decision easy. But I think you're right. It's going to be somewhere in the middle. I'm more interested. I really want to see more Drew Lock. I really do. So I'm interested in seeing what he could actually bring to the table. You know, because he's younger, he has. I just think he has a lot of upside. I know he makes a lot of kind of boneheaded decisions, but I think that if he could learn to fix that, he's got all the tools in the world. So for me, I would really want to see. I mean, I'm not wishing Geno to get hurt or anything like that by any means, but for sure, I would want to. I just at some point I would like to see Locke. So if that's because Geno's playing poorly, then so be it. But I think on the topic of Geno, I see more of him probably playing that middle road. I think he's going to hit some of those incentives. I don't think he's going to hit all of them, but we've given him every tool this year to hit those, right? I mean, JSN's coming in, even Jake Bobo's going to be a phenomenal player for him. He's got all the running backs, he's got tight ends. He's got no reason not to hit those incentives. So he doesn't. I think that can tell you something. We've given him all the tools. I think it might make the decision a little easier. Sure, it might be, hey, we don't want to. Maybe they restructure his contract as well. Maybe they do something after this year and say, okay, you proved yourself that you can be a starter, but maybe you didn't hit all the incentives that we wanted you to, or like we wanted you to hit something a certain level, and they restructure the contract to fit, going forward. But I think it's going to be a middle of the road. I don't think he's going to play phenomenally, but I don't think he's going to,
That's the fear.
I don't think he's going to be bad.
No, I kind of think I think that's part of the problem. I think he's probably going to have some really good games next year or this year, and I suspect we might see at least a stretch similar to the back end of last season when he had a lot of turnover-worthy plays and had an obscene amount of luck with those not actually turning into actual turnovers. Before I come to you, Adam, I've just seen this from Field Yates, and he says, so this is the tweet, and Curtis is in the chat. So I want to ask Curtis, if you are listening to this, Curtis, give us a thought on what this actually means, because you're the cap expert. Effective today at 4 p.m., the NFL's top 51 cap space rule went away for the season. Many teams created cap space through contract restructures after this deadline. So there's a whole bunch of players who had their contracts restructured after the NFL's top 51 cap space rule went away. And that includes Jamal Adams. The Seahawks have restructured Jamal Adams' contract and have created $6.6 million of cap space. So Curtis, if you are listening, I want to know what that means. If you can give us a quick thought, because what does it mean for next year's cap? Why would they need $6.6 million? Why now? I guess now because there must be a reason financially to do that. I'd love to know what that means. Now, other teams have created a lot more cap space. George Kittle and Trent Williams, they've both combined to create $23 million for the Niners, which is in relation to what I was talking about earlier, that they're in cap trouble. Shaq Barrett saved 10 million. Wyatt Teller at the Cleveland saved another. I don't know why Cleveland need any more money. I just find it interesting. 6.6 million saved. They have restructured Jamal Adams' contract. So there we go. Curtis has seen it. But if you have any thoughts, Curtis, no pressure. No pressure. But if you have got any thoughts on what that means, let us know. And there is an injury report out. Just to quickly mention this. Kenny McIntosh and Jamal Adams did not practice today. Derek Cole, Mike Morris, Darrell Taylor, Devin Witherspoon were limited, and Smith and Jigbert and Cody Thompson were full practice. Right, that's all that I addressed. Adam, give us a Geno Smith thought.
I was probably one of his biggest detractors last year, and I don't believe in the whole sort of eating crow kind of thing. I think, you say stuff about sports, it's right or it's wrong. It is what it is. And I thought, obviously, he played well enough to be given a decent contract. And I see what you're saying, that the worry is that if the aim is to win, how long do you tolerate sort of just keeping on being decent? I think you guys probably said everything that needs to be said about Geno. My argument would be, I think I'm a bit worried that the whole team, as it stands, I'm a little bit concerned. Like, if they're just good this year, what do you think the future of the team in general is going to be? Because I feel like a lot of the buzz has been about, trying to hark back to 2012, and we're building something and the blocks are in place. And obviously at the end of that year, it was clear that they were a couple pieces away from being, the Super Bowl champions that they ended up being. If they go 9-8, 10-7 again this year, which I think would be a disappointment, I think they should be looking at more wins than that. My worry is, I don't know, what do you do then? Because you've then used all of the resources that you got from the big trade. And I think to all intents and purposes, they've done well. But from a resources standpoint, you're just at the point where you have everyone else has, and you're decent. So your draft position isn't that staggering that you can do much with it. I guess I'm actually more worried about the whole team being good. That's my biggest worry for the whole year, that they end up going 9-8, 10-7, and which direction do you go in from there?
Yeah, and Robbie made a good point about the weapons and everything like that is set up for Geno Smith to have a great year. But I also think that also puts a lot of pressure on him. Like, he has no excuse now. As long as these guys stay healthy, this has to be a very good year. He has to show that he's not going to be the... If this team is going to get into contention, whether that's this year, next year, the year after, whatever, that he is the man who's going to get them there. He has to show that now. We can all sit here, if we're all sat here at the end of the year and going, hey, look, that offense was unbelievable. It's a top 10 offense in the league. It's the defense that let them down. Then there'll be no question that they just crack on with the offense and it's business as usual. If Geno Smith is middling, then people are quite rightly going to say, well, hang on a minute, you've got all these weapons, team's moving in the right direction. But when the Russell Wilson trade came about, no one was expecting Geno Smith to be the answer. And yet here we are. So I think it's fascinating. Look, I know what the reaction will be to us having this conversation. A lot of people are going to go, Geno's the guy, and why are you doing this? And you said this, and you said, listen, I happily did a video saying I was wrong about Geno Smith last year. And I don't think there's anything wrong with having this discussion right now. I think it's an interesting talking point that isn't being discussed anywhere else, that, Geno's contract is something to monitor based on his performance level this year. And I do think it's interesting, and I think it's important for the future of this team. And I'm fascinated to see how Geno Smith gets on, as I'm sure everybody else is. I'm also suddenly fascinated to know what $6.6 million means, whether that's a thing to roll over for next year, whether it suggests that they might do something somewhere via trade or whatever. I must admit, guys, I did wonder whether or not, John Schneider coming out and complaining essentially that there weren't many defensive linemen coming into the league. It kind of made me think, well, maybe that points towards actually going and doing some kind of a trade with somebody, maybe even a big trade. Because if those players aren't coming out, Robbie, what's your solution? Because everyone's going on what a great defensive line draft it's going to be next year. I've watched these guys. I ain't seen it. There are players that show flashy plays, but there's no one who's got me out of my chair yet. You know, people are saying people like Chris Jenkins at Michigan are going to be like a top 15 pick. I ain't seeing that at all. He's a great athlete, but I mean, come on, you know, you can't just put somebody in the top 15 because of Bruce Feldman's freaks list. So I don't know if the solutions are necessarily going to be there in the first round next year. Maybe they are set to be aggressive, Robbie. Maybe they are going to do something. I don't know who it would be because people are saying Chris Jones. The Chiefs would be crazy to trade him away. Somebody posted what their D-line would be without him. It'd be the worst, one of the worst in the league.
Well, they did just create 6.6 million cap space to take on a hit on another defensive tackle if that's the case. So, I mean, it's possible a trade is in the works, and you know they haven't been shy about trading picks. So, I've always been against trading that first round pick just because I got pretty tired of us missing on that. But if it's someone like Chris Jones and you're going to use a first round pick, I'd have a hard time being upset about that, especially with how well he would elevate the defense. But as you said, are the Chiefs really going to be willing to do that? I'm not interested in trading 2 first-round picks, that's for sure, or more. So I guess it depends on what the cost would be to go get that defensive tackle and which defensive tackle it is.
They'd be crazy to trade Chris Jones. They've got all that cap space next year, so there's no reason not to pay him. And Adam, somebody mentioned the stat. I don't know the specifics of it, but essentially that the Chiefs with Chris Jones are number 1 in pass rush win rate in the league, and without him they're something like 25th in the league. Like, that's how impactful he is, and they have nobody. They've nobody. There's nobody coming through who can say, okay, well, we're going to pass the torch to this guy now. And unlike when they traded Tyreek Hill to Miami, they already had Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid and everything else that comes with the Chiefs offense. They could afford to lose one of those guys and get an absolute haul. And they drafted some players to try and fill the void and signed some players to try and fill the void. This trading Chris Jones would be almost like giving up the Chiefs. They'd be maybe not so much giving up because they've got Mahomes, but it would be a huge surrender to give him away at this point in the season now, right as the season's about to begin. That just doesn't seem likely to me. But then they have just created some money, and maybe there's a much lesser player they could go and acquire. But I'm not sure signing an average player on a $5 million contract, for example, is particularly attractive, to be honest. Any more attractive than we'll be just sort of going into the season with a slightly crap D-line.
No, it's interesting they've done it, though. You know, I think Curtis said above in the chat that it makes Jamal more expensive to cut next year. And I think I'm right in saying that the same is true of Quandre Diggs with the restructure they gave him earlier on in the offseason. And I don't know, I think if we were having this discussion at the back end of last season, would we have expected to have 2 more years of both Diggs and Adams on the roster? I don't know. I mean, I don't want to rewrite the history, but it surprises me that they think that that's going to be the case. I don't know what you think about that, Rob.
I'm trying to catch up because I'm behind in the chat, so I was saving the super chats. So yeah, Curtis says it looks like they pushed money into 2024 and 2025. I assume they were going to go ahead and guarantee his 2023 salary of $11 million since they hadn't done anything, so really it doesn't change their overall commitments. And then he says it just costs more to cut him next year, which is bizarre. But what it does do is open up flexibility. They can do something this year. They now have about $8.8 million to spend, or they can roll it into 2024 and just apply it against next year's cap. So, and he says, just remember, 2 years ago, they gave Diggs and Dwayne bonus money and opened room and did nothing with it, which is a very good point. So maybe that's it. Maybe they just... And Schneider was saying there's something like that in one of the interviews this week. He was saying that Ted Thompson would say, keep your powder dry. So it's worth having a bit of money to play with. So maybe they are just creating room so that he can do just that, have a bit of money to play with. Chris Jones has $90 million salary this year. They'd have to move a bunch of money around in the extension to make it work. Doable, but that would be very, very aggressive. So it doesn't sound very likely. It just sounds a bit like they're making it more expensive to cut Jamal Adams, as they have with Quandre Diggs, which I don't think is a very wise financial move. And it's all to sort of have a bit to play with if an opportunity comes up over the next 6 weeks. So there we go. Super chats. Chris says Maffei seems ahead of Taylor at this point with Hall and Smith for depth. Would Taylor be a trade piece? Guys, would you trade him? Robbie, would you trade Darryl Taylor?
I don't know. I kind of want to see what. No, I wouldn't. I'll keep it simple. No, I wouldn't trade him right now. I want to see what we have with our DNs and see what happens and how well they do it. If we have to package him for another defensive lineman that's going to be beneficial for us, like interior, then maybe. But yeah, kind of what Star just said. It really depends on what you get.
Adam?
It's tricky with him because I can't imagine anyone's going to be throwing that much at you for Darryl Taylor. So you need to see him play more. And if he plays well, then you're going to say, well, be mad to get rid of him. And if he doesn't play well, the package you're going to get back in return isn't going to be worth a hill of beans, I wouldn't have thought. So I think Taylor's in this awkward position where no one's exactly sure what he is. And as a result, I'm not entirely sure what you'd get in return for him that would even be worth it at this stage without at least seeing the guy play another half season and making a judgment on it from there.
I'd be open to it if like Robbie said, it helps you improve among the interior because you have got some real depth off the edge now. But the concern that I would have is that one thing we've got to remember with Darryl Taylor is that a lot of teams at pre-draft did not clear him medically. So those teams are not going to go, well, we're now going to clear him. If they didn't clear him at the combine, then they ain't clearing him now. So what exactly is his value, especially in a trade? So yeah, I'm not sure you get much for him. Albert says Geno Smith will be just disappointing enough to stick around. That's Albert's view. Albert, appreciate the super chat. Thank you for that. And that is my fear, that Geno Smith will be okay. And then they've got a decision to make. But we'll see. Big Mike says season record predictions, please, guys. Robbie, you got a season prediction?
I'll say 10-7.
Adam?
I'm going to go optimistic and say 11-6. And I think the team needs to go 11-6. Otherwise, we're going to be sat here in January thinking, what are we playing at? Where are we going?
I'm going to go with 10-7 like Robbie. I think that's the safe prediction. Mike, appreciate the super chat as always. Great supporter of the blog and the channel. I think that's it for super chats. If you have any late ones, stick them through. The very last thing, guys, because it's been a long stream. The very last thing I wanted to just touch on was the draft stuff. I have already started building a board. It is a very empty board at the moment because I have to watch players play multiple times to put on it. But I have watched a lot of the quarterbacks over the summer and I've started to watch them. And Robbie, I think that is part of the good news for this draft is that look, there might not be a first round defensive tackle that I've not found one yet. I'm not saying I won't find one. I'm just saying that the ones that I've watched so far, I think they're sort of mid-round guys. But there's depth. I've already watched 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 defensive tackles who I think could be day 2 picks. Probably more round 3 than round 2. So there's some depth there. And then at quarterback, there are a lot of names. I don't think a lot of these names are necessarily going to be in the first round, but there's a lot of these guys who could be day 2 picks. So, how do you sort of feel about it? Is that, I suppose that's a good thing, isn't it? I don't think it's going to be a particularly fantastic, top-heavy draft where you've got loads of stars at the front. You've obviously got Caleb Williams and Marvin Harrison Jr. and not really anybody else after that. But if the Seahawks aren't picking that early, it doesn't matter. And maybe the quarterbacks and the defensive linemen will play into their favor, Robbie.
Yeah, I mean, it's just fun to have football back and it's still early in the season to kind of get those kind of predictions, but just watching even some of the quarterbacks play this last Saturday is when it gives me hope that there's a good chance that some of these guys could exceed expectations this year and move up the board and or have the potential to even land in Seattle. So I think there's some really good good talent out there. But again, I just want to see how the whole season plays out.
I'll give you some names that I was impressed with sort of from the first weekend. I think the Texas guys on the defensive line, I thought Tavondre Sweat, what a name that is, by the way. I think that right now we're going through a period where the names in college football are slightly ridiculous. Like there are some hilarious names in college football. Tavondre Sweat is one of them. He's a huge athletic nose tackle, and he was incredibly disruptive in week 1. And he's got his 2 mates there on the defensive line, Alfred Collins, who's got rave reviews from Texas. Tavondre Sweat apparently had some sort of attitude issues and maturity issues, and he sorted that out. I thought he was the most impressive defensive lineman for Texas. Alfred Collins and Byron Murphy were quiet, but they're getting talked up quite a lot. So some names there on the defensive line. Michael Penix Jr. The scheme is the scheme. I mean, I've talked a lot about that, and it will worry me a little bit that he is kind of working within this system, which is incredibly difficult to project to the next level. But F me, that is an arm. You know, that is an arm. So the injury history as well, but that is an arm. That is a God-given arm for Michael Penix Jr. And I thought Riley Leonard played well. I don't know if you see any of that, Robbie. You see any of Riley Leonard from Duke?
Yeah, man. What's funny, I was reading a little bit about him prior to the game starting, and they were kind of hyping him up just a little bit, and then to watch him go out and play, I mean, it's a talented kid. I'd like to see him throw the ball a little bit better, but I mean, he's got some
the tools, hasn't he?
Yeah,
the tools. And I thought Spencer Rattler had a good game in a terrible. I mean, it was like watching Kentucky last year. He got sacked 9 times. But I was really impressed with the way he didn't press and he didn't force things and he didn't turn the ball over, and he still made some really good throws. And to me, Spencer Rattler could be the diamond in the rough within this class. Somebody who is maybe going to last a bit longer because he has had a very protracted career in college and has had some real lows and only a handful of highs. But there's just something about it. He's very talented, and the maturity issues seem to be in the past now. And then Shedeur Sanders, obviously, it's crazy. I mean, when you actually sort of listen to Deion Sanders, it's hard to imagine that he is like coach material necessarily, and yet here he is, did a tremendous job in his was it Jackson State, and now he's got a win against Colorado and has got that team playing incredibly well, and his son looked brilliant. Did you see that one, Robbie? Did you see any of the Colorado game?
I did, yeah. I was shocked. That was a fun game to watch too, by the way. Just super fun.
I just wonder whether Shedeur will stay with Colorado while ever his dad's there, and then max out his time in college. Yeah. And then just a few other things. I thought Drake May was slightly disappointing again. I think he's quite overrated. Not bad, just not top 5 for me yet. I thought Quinn Ewers had a very so-so game again. Obviously, I think the Seahawks will like his talent, but I'm not buying that he's a first-round player at this point. And I thought Jordan Travis was okay. Jaden Daniels was not very impressive. I thought Grayson McCall struggled at the end against UCLA, had a couple of bad turnovers. And then the sort of the last name I want to bring up was our old friend Tyler Van Dyke there, Robbie. And I'm very sorry.
Poor bastard.
I'm very sorry to say that he is still being held back by that atrocious offensive system that Mario Cristobal uses. I don't know why he didn't get out of Dodge while he had the chance. Why is he still in Miami, Robbie? It's very sad.
Yeah. I know you don't watch sophomores very often, but Drew Aller from Penn State, if you get a chance just to
watch the highlights. I watched the highlights of that. I've not seen the game.
I like the way he commanded the game, and being young. Something about him. I like him. I
will probably see some at Penn State at some point, so I will get a chance to watch him later. But there we go. I could mention a few other names, but I feel like I might do a video on the draft before the weekend or something like that with a few thoughts there. Taker 610 says best college football name is Kool-Aid McKinstry. That is definitely one of the top names in college football, but it's certainly there are so many weird names right now in college football. So I think there's he's definitely up there, but there's quite a few others as well. Fellas, appreciate your time and your thoughts on the Seahawks. Thank you to everybody for the super chats and to everybody who's been watching live and contributing in the live chat. Join us after the Seahawks game against the Rams for our instant reaction stream. Very much looking forward to that, where we'll pick through the bones of the game. Here's to a thoroughly enjoyable 2023 NFL Seahawks season, guys. Let's hope it goes well. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a video. Hit the like button, leave a comment. Even if you've been posting in the live chat, leave a comment. It helps the algorithm. And SeahawksDraftBlog.com, where there's loads of draft stuff on there already if you want to check that out. There's loads of analysis. Until Sunday and that post-game video for the Rams game, have a great weekend, and we'll see you later. Bye for now.